Bruh. They shared a shelter in the cold. He didn't know he was now her mate by sacred law. Narration. The snow had fallen early, and the wind seemed to cut through even the thickest of coats. Streets that were usually filled with life were now silent, buried under heavy layers of white breath. People stayed indoors, fires burning in their homes, while the cold crept over the city like a silent, invisible enemy. But for Armand, there was no warm home waiting for him. Brah. He had been on his own for months, surviving by his wits, moving from one temporary shelter to another, always avoiding trouble, always careful not to be noticed. That night, the wind was sharper than usual. The biting cold made every step feel heavy, every breath visible as clouds in the frosty air. Armand pulled his coat tight around him, shivering as he scanned the streets for a safe place. Brett. He had been walking for hours, his feet numb and his body trembling, and he knew that if he did not find shelter soon, the cold could overwhelm him completely. Narration. Just as he was about to give up hope, he spotted a small cabin at the edge of town, partially hidden behind snow-covered trees. The door was old and slightly open, but it seemed like it had been abandoned for some time. Narration. But desperate, Armand approached it. Each step through the snow made a crunching sound that echoed eerily in the quiet night. Narration. His fingers were frozen, almost numb, and his teeth chattered as he pushed the door open. The cabin smelled of old wood and dust, but inside it was dry and, more importantly, it was a refuge from the storm outside. Narration. He stepped in carefully, scanning the small space. It was empty, or so he thought. From the corner of the room, a shadow moved. Startled, Armand froze, his heart beating fast. Bert. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly from the cold and fear. A woman stepped out of the shadows, her hair slightly frozen from the cold, her eyes wary and alert. "I could ask you the same thing," she said softly but firmly. Bruh. She was holding a small blanket around herself, her body tense, ready to defend herself if needed.
Armand's first instinct was to retreat, but the cold outside made it impossible.
Brr. "I'm just looking for shelter," he explained, trying to sound calm. "I won't bother you." Narration. "I just need to stay warm for a while." The woman studied him for a moment. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Finally, she nodded slightly.
Okay.
Pretensive. "But stay on your side. There's only so much room here." Hurry. Relieved, Armand stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door behind him. He removed his coat, letting the faint warmth of the cabin touch his chilled body. The woman introduced herself as Zara. She had been living in the cabin for a few days, ever since she had lost her home to the snowstorm. Narration. Her family had been gone for years, and she had learned to survive on her own. There was a quiet strength about her, a confidence that came from knowing she could face danger alone. The two of them sat silently for a few minutes, each wary of the other. The fire that Zara had managed to light flickered weakly, casting shadows across the walls. Brr. Outside, the wind howled like a wild animal, rattling the cabin and shaking the small windows. Inside, there was only the quiet sound of their breathing and the occasional crackle of the fire. Narration. "Armand broke the silence! It's colder than I expected tonight," he said, trying to make small talk. Zara gave a small smile, the first sign of warmth in the room. "You can say that again," she said. "This snow is relentless." "But at least we have each other's company." Armand hesitated. He had not expected company. He had survived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to trust someone else. Narration. but there was something about Zara that made him feel safer than he had in a long time. She wasn't just another stranger. There was a calmness in her presence, a sense that she had faced worse and come through. They shared a small meal, whatever they had managed to gather from their separate journeys. It was nothing fancy, just bread and a little cheese, but it was enough to bring some warmth and comfort. They ate quietly, exchanging stories about how they had ended up in the storm. Armand spoke of the city streets, the nights spent wandering, the constant search for safety. Zara told him about losing her home and learning to survive alone in the harsh winter. Each story revealed not only struggle but also resilience, a determination to survive no matter the cost. As the night deepened, they found themselves talking about things more personal. Armin had always been cautious, but something about the shared experience made him open up. He spoke of his dreams, of the life he wished he could have, and of the loneliness that had followed him for so long. Zara listened, sharing her own hopes and fears. She told him about her belief in certain old traditions, about how people once believed that sharing warmth and shelter in the cold could create bonds between people, bonds stronger than friendship or even family. Armin listened, intrigued but skeptical. He had never thought much about such things. To him, survival was practical, not mystical. But the more he listened, the more he felt a strange pull toward her. There was something in the way she spoke, a quiet authority in her voice, and a gentle kindness in her eyes. He realized he had not felt this kind of connection with anyone in a long time. There was comfort in her presence, a feeling of being understood without needing to explain everything. For the first time in months, he felt that he could truly rest, even if just for a few hours. The storm outside raged on, snow piling higher against the cabin walls. But inside, there was a small warmth that neither of them could explain fully. It wasn't just the fire, it was the shared understanding, the trust that had begun to grow in such a short time. The night passed slowly, each hour stretching long as they took turns keeping watch and maintaining the fire. They laughed quietly at small things, exchanged smiles, and shared silence that was comfortable, not awkward.
Armin noticed how Zara moved with purpose even in the cramped space.
She had an instinctive way of managing the small cabin, making it livable and safe. He admired her strength, her courage, and the way she had learned to survive alone. He realized that despite their differences, they complemented each other in ways he had not expected. As dawn approached, the wind outside began to ease slightly. The first pale light of morning crept through the small windows, casting a soft glow on the two figures in the cabin. Armin and Zara sat together, wrapped in blankets, feeling the warmth of the fire and, perhaps unknowingly, the warmth of a new bond forming between them. It was a bond forged in hardship, in trust, and in the quiet understanding that had grown through shared struggle. Neither of them spoke of the future, and yet both knew that this night had changed something. Something unspoken had begun. A connection that went beyond mere friendship or circumstance. Armand did not understand the full significance of it, nor did he know about the sacred traditions that Zara held in her heart. But he felt it, a subtle, undeniable shift in how he saw her, and in how he felt about being near her. The snowstorm had forced them together, but the bond that had formed in that small cabin was stronger than the cold that raged outside. In the harshest night of winter, two strangers had found warmth in each other, not just warmth to survive, but warmth that could change the course of their lives forever. The morning after the storm was quieter than the night had been. The snow had settled into thick, soft layers, blanketing the trees, the streets, and the cabin in white. Outside, the world looked still, almost peaceful, but the cold was far from gone. Armin woke early, shivering as the chill seeped through the thin blankets. He rubbed his arms and tried to shake off the numbness in his fingers. Across the small cabin, Zara was already awake, tending to the fire with careful, practiced movements. "Morning," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Narration. "Morning," she replied, glancing up and giving a small smile. "We should try to get some food before it gets worse. The snow might make it hard to move later."
Armin nodded, knowing she was right.
Narration. Despite the warmth of the cabin, their bodies needed proper sustenance to survive the bitter cold. Together they gathered what little supplies they had. Arman had a few slices of bread and some dried fruit he had found the day before, while Zara had a small container of preserved food she had managed to keep safe. They shared it between them, eating quietly but with an unspoken understanding that each small bite was precious. Once their meal was finished, they stepped outside into the bright, cold morning. The snow crunched under their boots, the sound loud in the silent forest around them. The air was sharp, each breath making their lungs sting. But the light of the sun reflecting off the snow gave the world a strange beauty. Zara led the way, moving with ease, while Armin followed, careful not to slip on the icy patches. Narration. He watched her closely, noticing the grace in her movements, the quiet confidence in her eyes. She seemed unafraid of the cold or the snow, as if she had been born to face this harsh world and bend it to her will. As they walked, they talked, sharing more about their lives. Arman spoke of the city he had left behind, the crowded streets and the noise, the people he had met and lost. He told Zara about nights when he had almost given up, about moments when he had felt invisible and forgotten. Narration. Zara listened, her eyes softening as she heard his story. She shared her own past as well, stories of family lost and the loneliness that had shaped her. Each story built trust between them, a bridge connecting two people who had both been alone for far too long. The cabin became their meeting point over the next few days. Every morning, they would venture out together to find food, firewood, or anything that could help them survive. Every evening they would return, exhausted but safe, sharing warmth and conversation in the small space. Slowly, Armand began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way Sarah's hands moved with care, the quiet determination in her voice, the way she smiled even when things seemed impossible. He felt drawn to her in ways he could not explain, but he tried not to think too deeply about it. Survival was his priority, not emotions, but emotions had a way of sneaking in, especially when survival forced people to rely on each other so completely.
One evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire sputtered weakly, Zara handed Armand a blanket.
Narration. "Here," she said softly. "You're shivering too much."
"You need to stay warm." Armin accepted it, surprised by the tenderness in her gesture. He wrapped it around his shoulders and felt a strange comfort, not just from the warmth, but from the thoughtfulness behind it.
For the first time in months, he did not feel alone. The storm outside seemed less threatening when she was near, and he realized that he had started to look forward to these moments of quiet companionship. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They laughed together, sharing small jokes and teasing each other gently. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, and the little things that made life worth living. Armand found himself opening up more than he had in years, telling Zara things he had never told anyone. And Zara in turn shared her beliefs, the stories her parents had once told her about survival, trust, and the sacred laws of her ancestors. She spoke of how, in old times, when two people survived together through hardship, a special bond could form, stronger than friendship, almost like fate. Armin listened with curiosity, unsure if he believed in such things, but he could not deny that something had shifted between them. There was a warmth, a connection, that went beyond words. He found himself watching her when she moved, noticing the way her hair fell across her face, the intensity of her eyes, the strength in her hands. He felt protective of her, though he did not fully understand why. Inspiration. And Zara, though she tried to keep her feelings in check, felt the same pull. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to care about someone so deeply. But Armand had awoken something in her. A quiet hope she thought she had lost. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they ventured farther from the cabin than usual. Inspiration. The snow was deeper here and the cold more biting. They worked together to navigate the terrain, helping each other over icy patches and fallen branches. Breaths. At one point, Armand slipped on a hidden patch of ice, and Zara caught him just in time. They held each other briefly, their faces close, the cold forgotten for a moment. Armand felt a rush of warmth, a sudden awareness of how important she had become to him. He pulled back quickly, embarrassed, but he could not deny the feeling that had taken root in his chest. That night, back in the cabin, they sat by the fire, silent for a long time. The storm outside had calmed, but the wind still whispered through the cracks in the walls. Armand looked at Zara, noticing the way her eyes reflected the firelight, and he realized that he cared for her more than he had expected. He wanted to protect her, to stay near her, to ensure that nothing would harm her. And Zara, sensing the same feelings, felt a mixture of joy and fear. She had believed in the sacred law, and the bond that could form between two people who survived together, but she did not know if Armand would understand. The night stretched on, and they talked quietly, sharing memories and thoughts, building a connection that felt unbreakable. They laughed softly, they shared small moments of tenderness, and they found comfort in each other's presence. It was a connection that had grown slowly, naturally, through shared struggle and trust. Neither of them had expected it, but both knew it was real. Days turned into a week, and their routine became their lifeline. Every morning they faced the cold together. Every night they returned to the cabin, sharing warmth and stories. Armand began to anticipate Zara's thoughts, to understand her moods, to notice when she needed help even before she asked. Zara, in turn, felt a deep sense of security with him, a trust she had not felt in years. They were two people shaped by hardship, finding solace and companionship in each other. And all the while the idea of the sacred law lingered in the air, unspoken but present. Zara believed it, felt it, and respected it deeply. Armand did not yet understand it fully, but he could sense its influence in the bond that had grown between them. They had survived the storm together, faced the cold together, and in doing so they had formed a connection that was rare, profound, and unbreakable. By the end of the week, Armand realized that his perspective on life had changed. He had come to value more than just survival. He had come to value trust, companionship, and the warmth that came from sharing life with someone who understood him completely. Zara had become not just a friend, but a companion, a confidant, someone he could rely on in the harshest conditions. And Zara, too, felt that their connection was special, a bond that went beyond mere circumstance, a bond that might even be guided by something greater than themselves. As they sat together one cold evening watching the fire flicker, Armand finally spoke, breaking the silence that had grown comfortable. "I never thought I would find someone I could trust like this," he said quietly, his voice sincere. Zara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight and a quiet understanding. "Neither did I," she replied softly, "but I'm glad we did."
In that small cabin, in the middle of a winter that seemed endless, two people had found something rare and precious.
They had found warmth not just from fire and blankets, but from companionship, trust, and the beginnings of a bond that neither could yet fully understand. They had survived the storm together, and in doing so had discovered that the coldest nights could sometimes bring the warmest connections. The days after the storm had brought a strange calm. The snow still covered the ground in thick white layers, But the wind had softened, and the sun glimmered through the clouds, reflecting off the frozen branches.
Armin and Zara continued their routine, venturing out together during the day to gather firewood, food, and supplies.
Life had settled into a rhythm, one that was simple, harsh, and yet comforting. But even in this fragile comfort, tension was starting to creep in, small and almost imperceptible at first.
It began with a disagreement over the supplies.
Armin had spotted a small abandoned shed a few miles from the cabin, and he insisted on going to search it. Zara hesitated, worried about traveling so far in the snow and cold.
It could be dangerous, she warned, her eyes scanning the horizon. We don't know who or what might be out there.
I can handle it, Armin said firmly.
We need food and supplies. We can't just sit here and hope someone brings it to us. Zara frowned, sensing the stubborn determination in his voice. I'm not saying you can't handle it, she replied, but we should plan carefully. The snow is deeper than it looks, and the ice can be treacherous.
The argument was small, almost trivial, but it marked the first real crack in their harmony. Armin was practical and impatient. Zara was cautious and mindful of traditions she respected.
Their approaches to survival were different. And while these differences had once complemented each other, now they were beginning to create friction. The next morning, Armin decided to go to the shed alone, insisting he could manage on his own. Zara reluctantly agreed, trusting his skills but worrying deeply.
Be careful, she said, pressing a small scarf into his hand.
Wrap this around your neck. It's stronger than it looks.
Armin smiled, taking the scarf. But there was an unspoken tension between them now. He left the cabin, trudging through the deep snow, the cold biting at his face and hands. He focused on the task ahead, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was shifting between him and Zara. Hours passed, and Zara waited in the cabin, the silence stretching long and heavy. She paced the small room, glancing at the door every few minutes, hoping to see him return. But the minutes felt like hours, and worry gnawed at her.
What if something had happened to him? What if the cold or the ice had been too much?
When Armin finally returned, he was carrying a small bag of supplies, but his expression was tense. He had been lucky. The shed was mostly empty, but he had found some food and a few items that could help them survive the coming week. Yet something in his tone suggested frustration.
They weren't careful with anything, he muttered, dumping the supplies onto the table.
Everything is broken, half buried in snow. We're lucky I found anything at all. Zara looked at him, sensing the irritation behind his words.
I told you it was risky, she said softly.
We could have planned it better together. Armin sighed, rubbing his temples. I just wanted to help, he said. I don't need advice every step of the way. The tension between them was thick, the warmth of their previous days seeming distant. Zara felt hurt, not because of the words themselves, but because she sensed that Armin was beginning to doubt her instincts. And Armin, though frustrated, did not fully understand why he felt so annoyed. The stress of survival, the harsh cold, and the unfamiliar feelings he had for Zara were all mixing together, creating a storm as intense as the one outside their cabin had been. Later that evening, as the wind picked up again, a new danger emerged. A pack of stray dogs, hungry and desperate in the aftermath of the storm, had been roaming the nearby forest. Zara spotted them first, their shapes moving between the trees, their eyes glinting in the fading light.
Armin, she whispered urgently. There are dogs!
We should be careful. Armin grabbed a sturdy stick, positioning himself near the door.
How many? He asked, scanning the shadows. 3, maybe 4, Zara said, her voice tense.
They're moving this way. We need to stay inside.
The dogs approached cautiously, growling softly, sniffing the air. Narration. Armin and Zara held their ground, hearts pounding. The cabin felt smaller than ever, the walls thin against the growls that now seemed deafening. Brr.
Armin's protective instincts flared, and for a moment he forgot their argument and focused entirely on keeping Zara safe. The dogs circled the cabin, testing the weak structure and sniffing for weaknesses.
Brr. Zara grabbed a small pot from the shelf, ready to use it if necessary, while Armand stood near the door, stick in hand, ready to fend them off. The minutes stretched endlessly, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, the dogs lost interest, distracted by something in the distance, and wandered off into the forest. Both of them exhaled, relief washing over them in waves, but the incident left its mark. They realized how vulnerable they were, how easily the harsh winter and unpredictable dangers could tear their fragile safety apart. In the quiet that followed, Arman and Zara sat together, closer than before, the fire flickering weakly between them. Arman looked at her, seeing the way her eyes shone with determination and courage. Desperation. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "I shouldn't have snapped at you earlier." Desperation. I just...
Zara nodded, understanding. "I know," she replied.
Desperation.
I worry too. And I know you're trying your best.
Desperation. We just need to remember we're in this together. The moment passed, and while it did not erase the tension completely, it reminded them both why they had survived this long. Their bond was not just about trust or companionship. It was about reliance, about knowing that each person's strengths and weaknesses balanced the other.
They had survived storms, snow, and hunger together, and now they were learning to survive the emotional storms that came with living so closely in extreme conditions.
That night, as they lay under blankets, the fire's warmth keeping the cold at bay, they spoke softly about their fears. Aman admitted that he had never relied on anyone like this before, and that the feelings he had for Zara confused him. He did not know if it was friendship, respect, or something deeper. Narration, her hand brushing lightly against his, offering silent comfort.
I think we've changed each other, she said gently.
Narration, this storm, this cold, everything we've been through, it's not just survival. Bear, it's something more, something I can't explain. But I feel it. Narration. Armin nodded, looking into the fire. He could feel it too, though he did not fully understand it. It was in the way his heart raced when she was near, in the quiet moments of comfort when they shared the small cabin, and in the protective instinct that seemed stronger than anything he had ever known.
Desperation.
He realized that he had come to care for her in a way he could not ignore, even if he could not name it yet. The following days tested them further.
Supplies were scarce, and the temperature continued to drop. They had to ration carefully, travel carefully, and watch each other constantly. Every small mistake could have serious consequences, and yet each challenge brought them closer together. Their arguments became less frequent, replaced by careful planning and understanding. They learned to anticipate each other's thoughts, to communicate without words, and to trust instincts shaped by shared experience. But even as they grew closer, the memory of the argument over the shed lingered. It was a reminder that their differences could be a source of tension as easily as their bond could be a source of strength. Armand began to understand that Zara's cautious nature was not weakness, it was wisdom born from experience. And Zara recognized that Armand's determination was not stubbornness. It was courage and a refusal to give up even in the harshest conditions. By the end of the week, they had survived the new dangers.
managed the cold, and protected each other from harm.
And while the storm outside had calmed, an internal storm had begun to settle between them. A mixture of understanding, frustration, admiration, and something neither fully understood yet. The bond hinted at in the nights of survival had grown stronger, and both realized that what had started as shared necessity was becoming something far more profound. Separation. In the quiet of the cabin under the dim glow of the fire, Armin and Zara looked at each other, understanding without words that they had survived far more than snow and hunger. They had survived fear, tension, and misunderstanding. Breath. And in doing so, they had discovered the resilience of their connection. A connection that was beginning to feel unbreakable, even as challenges loomed on the horizon. Bert. The days grew colder, and the winter's grip tightened around the forest and the small cabin where Armin and Zara had taken shelter. Even the trees seemed weighed down by snow, their branches bowed under the heavy white blanket. Break. The sunlight was weak, barely cutting through the thick clouds, and the nights were long and merciless. Each day was a struggle, a careful balance between survival and maintaining hope. But for Armin and Zara, the real challenge was no longer just the weather. It was the storm of emotions and unspoken feelings that had grown between them.
One morning, Zara woke to find the wind stronger than ever.
The storm had returned, fiercer than the last one, and the snow had already piled several feet high around the cabin. She moved quickly to the small window and peered outside, her brow furrowed in worry.
The path they had used to gather food and firewood was now completely buried. Traveling in these conditions would be extremely dangerous.
She turned to Armand, who was still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The storm is worse than before, she said softly. We need to stay inside until it passes. Armin nodded, already aware of the danger. He had felt the sharp bite of the wind earlier when he had stepped outside for firewood, and the cold had been enough to remind him that nature was still in control. We can survive here, he said, trying to reassure her. We've made it this far. We can handle a few more days. But even with his words, there was a tension in the cabin. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, the unspoken feelings and growing closeness between them pressing on both of their hearts. They spent the morning fortifying the cabin, stacking firewood, blocking drafts, and making sure the fire would last through the long, dark hours. Every small task reminded them that survival was not easy.
As the day wore on, the storm worsened. The wind howled against the walls, rattling the windows and shaking the cabin.
Irritant, snow piled high against a door, making it almost impossible to open. Outside, the world was a white blur, impossible to navigate without getting lost. Armin and Zara huddled near the fire, wrapped in blankets, trying to stay warm. The cold was relentless, and even the fire seemed weak against the strength of the storm. It was during this long, quiet night that the tension between them reached its peak. Sitting close to the fire, they both realized that their feelings for each other could no longer be ignored. The shared hardships, the trust, and the small moments of care had grown into something more, something neither of them fully understood but both could feel. Zara spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper.
Armin, do you ever feel that this bond between us
is more than just friendship?
Her words hung in the air, fragile yet full of meaning. Armin looked at her, surprised by the question. Brat. He had felt it too, but he had not wanted to admit it, not even to himself. Now, hearing her say it out loud, he realized how deeply he cared for her. I think I do, he admitted slowly. I felt it for some time, but I didn't know what to call it. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind outside, feeling the warmth of the fire between them, and recognizing the warmth that had grown in their hearts. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge that their bond was not just about survival. It was about trust, care, and a connection that had grown in the harshest conditions imaginable. The storm, however, was far from over. The following day brought a new challenge. The roof of the cabin had weakened under the weight of the snow, and a loud crack echoed through the structure as a heavy beam shifted. Armin and Zara rushed to support it, but a small section of the roof collapsed, sending snow and debris into the corner of the cabin. Both of them were unharmed, but the scare was enough to make them realize that staying inside was no longer safe. They would have to face the storm outside, a decision that terrified them both. They packed a few essential supplies, wrapped themselves in every layer of clothing they had, and prepared to leave the only shelter that had kept them alive for so long. The journey through the snow would be treacherous, but staying in a damaged cabin was even more dangerous. Narration. As they stepped outside, the world was a blinding white. The wind lashed at their faces, and the snow drifted in deep waves, making each step exhausting. They moved slowly, supporting each other, their hands sometimes brushing and sending small shocks through their bodies. The physical struggle was intense, but the emotional struggle was just as strong. They had grown to depend on each other completely, and leaving the cabin meant stepping into uncertainty together. Hours passed, each step a battle against the elements. At one point, Zara stumbled on a hidden patch of ice, nearly falling into a snowdrift. Armin caught her just in time, holding her close to prevent her from sliding. For a moment they stayed like that, their faces close, hearts racing from both the physical effort and the sudden intimacy.
"Thank you,"
she whispered, her voice trembling slightly.
"You don't need to thank me," he said, trying to steady his own breath.
Bray, we survived together. That's what we do. The storm showed no sign of easing, and fatigue began to set in. Their legs ached, their hands were numb, and the cold had seeped into their bones despite the layers of clothing. But they pressed on, motivated not just by survival but by the understanding that they could face anything together. The storm had tested them in ways the calm never could. It forced them to rely on each other fully, to communicate without words, and to trust instincts shaped by shared hardship. By late afternoon they spotted another small structure in the distance, half buried in snow. It looked abandoned but sturdier than their cabin had been. With renewed energy they pushed forward, helping each other step over drifts and navigate icy patches. When they finally reached it, they collapsed inside, exhausted but alive. The structure was not perfect, but it offered protection from the relentless wind and snow. As they rested, Zara turned to Armand. "I never thought we'd survive this," she said softly. "But I knew we could make it together."
Armin looked at her, feeling a surge of emotion he could not name. "I'm glad I was with you," he admitted.
I don't think I could have done it alone." For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the storm outside, feeling the warmth they had created together. The storm had been the ultimate test of their strength, resilience, and trust. It had pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed the depth of their bond. The hardships they faced had transformed their connection into something undeniable. That night, as they wrapped themselves in blankets, sitting close to each other to share warmth, they spoke quietly about the sacred law Zara had mentioned before.
She explained that in her culture, surviving together through extreme hardship could create a bond that was not just emotional, but spiritual.
Armin listened, intrigued, not fully believing in the ancient tradition, but feeling its truth in the way he cared for her, in the way his heart felt closer to hers than it ever had to anyone else. "I don't fully understand it," Armin admitted, "but I feel it. I feel connected to you in a way I can't explain. Maybe it's what you call the sacred law." Zara smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and the depth of her feelings. Maybe it is, she said.
Or maybe it's just that we've learned to trust and care for each other through everything. Either way,
Barish, it's real. The storm raged outside, but inside there was a calm that neither had known before. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, and they had come through it together. Their bond had been tested by circumstances more extreme than most could imagine, and it had only grown stronger. By the time dawn broke, the storm had finally begun to subside. The world outside was still covered in snow, but the wind had softened, and the sky hinted at sunlight. Armin and Zara stepped outside together, breathing in the crisp, fresh air. For the first time in days, they felt hope, not just for survival, but for the future of their connection. They had endured the cold, the snow, and the dangers that threatened their lives, and through it all, they had discovered the strength of their bond. It was no longer just a connection born of necessity. It was a bond of trust, care, and something deeper. Something neither of them could fully name yet, but both understood in their hearts. In the aftermath of the storm, they knew that life would continue to challenge them, that dangers would still lurk in the cold and snow. But they also knew that together they could face anything. And for the first time, both of them allowed themselves to hope, not just for survival, but for the warmth, comfort, and connection they had found in each other, a bond that had been forged in the harshest winter and would not be easily broken. The storm had finally passed. Outside, the world sparkled with untouched snow, the kind of white that seemed almost magical in its purity. The trees stood tall, their branches heavy with frost, and the sunlight reflected off the ice and snow in dazzling patterns. For Arman and Zara, the end of the storm marked more than just relief from the harsh winter. It symbolized a turning point in their lives, the beginning of something entirely new. Inside the small, sturdy shelter they had found after the collapse of their cabin, the two of them moved slowly, savoring the warmth and safety they had earned. The fire flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time in many days there was no immediate danger threatening their survival. They had faced storms, hunger, and fear together, and now the silence of the snow-covered world outside seemed gentle, almost welcoming. Armin stretched and shook the stiffness from his arms and legs. We made it, he said quietly, as if speaking aloud might make the moment more real. He looked at Zara, noticing how she moved with a quiet grace even in exhaustion. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a strength and warmth that he had grown to admire deeply. Zara smiled softly. Yes, she said, we made it. And we did it together. Their eyes met, and in that simple exchange both understood how far they had come. The bond that had grown between them during the storm, the struggles, and the long, cold nights had become something unbreakable. It was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, care, and a deep connection that neither of them could ignore. For a while they simply sat in quiet companionship, listening to the faint sounds of snow settling outside. Armin felt a strange mixture of relief, joy, and a quiet nervousness. He had come to care for Zara more than he had ever cared for anyone else, but he had also struggled to understand what that meant. Now, after weeks of facing hardship together, the answer seemed clearer. He wanted to stay by her side, to protect her, and to be a part of her life, in a way that went beyond friendship. Zara, sensing his thoughts, reached out and gently took his hand. The warmth of her touch was comforting, and the simple gesture spoke volumes. Armin, she whispered, I think this bond between us is real. The sacred law I told you about. Maybe it isn't just a story.
Maybe it's exactly what has been happening. Armin looked at her, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold.
He didn't fully understand the sacred law she spoke of, but he understood the truth of her words in his heart. They had faced unimaginable challenges together, relied on each other completely, and come through stronger because of it. That bond was real, undeniable, and it had changed him. "I don't know if I believe in sacred laws," he said softly, "but I do know this. I don't want to be anywhere else but with you." Whatever this is, I feel it too. Inspiration. Zara's eyes softened, and a small smile curved her lips. "Then maybe that's enough?" she said. "Bray, we don't need to understand it completely. We just need to accept it and see where it takes us." Over the next few days, they began to settle into a new routine, not just for survival, but for living. The shelter provided protection, the snow outside was manageable now, and the fear of storms had lessened. They worked together to gather firewood, collect food, and make the small structure as comfortable as possible. Each day they shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of companionship. Their connection deepened, no longer bound by necessity alone, but by choice, care, and mutual respect. Armand discovered new sides of Zara every day. The way she noticed small details in nature, how she adapted quickly to unexpected challenges, and how her quiet determination inspired him to be braver. Zara, in turn, saw Armand's resilience, his thoughtfulness, and the way he had grown more open, trusting, and caring since their first night together. The bond that had been hinted at during the storms was now undeniable, a steady presence in both of their hearts. One afternoon, after a long morning of gathering firewood, they sat together on a snow-covered log outside the shelter. The sun glinted off the snow, casting patterns of light across their faces. Armand took a deep breath, finally finding the courage to speak what had been on his mind. "Zara," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I know we've survived so much together."
And I know that some things can't be explained, but I want you to know something. I don't just care about you because we survived the cold or the storms.
I care about you because of who you are, because of everything you've shown me. I want to be with you, no matter what comes next.
Zara's eyes widened slightly, and then a gentle smile spread across her face. She reached out and took both of his hands in hers.
I feel the same way, Armand, she said. I felt it from the beginning, but I was afraid to admit it.
We've been through so much together, and now I know that I want to face everything with you by my side. The wind whispered through the trees, the snow sparkled in the sunlight, and they simply sat together, holding hands and feeling the warmth that had grown between them. It was a warmth far stronger than any fire, a connection that had been tested and proven by hardship. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy. They explored the surrounding forest carefully, gathering berries, collecting firewood, and learning more about each other. Each shared task, each small moment reinforced their bond. They laughed, teased each other, and even in the occasional moment of frustration, they found ways to resolve it, understanding that their connection was stronger than temporary disagreements. At night, as they sat together in the shelter wrapped in blankets and sharing warmth, they spoke softly about dreams for the future. Armand admitted that he had always longed for a place where he could belong, where he could feel safe and valued. Zara shared her hopes for companionship, trust, and a life where she could rely on someone as much as they could rely on her. They realized that they had already begun building that life together, one small step at a time. The sacred law Zara had mentioned earlier became less of a mysterious idea and more of a guiding principle. They didn't need to fully understand it to feel its truth. It was in the trust they shared, in the care they gave each other, and in the quiet moments when words were unnecessary. They had survived the harshest conditions and had come through not only alive but stronger and closer than ever before. Brr.
One evening, as the sun set behind the snowy hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Armand and Zara stepped outside together.
Brr. The snow glowed softly in the fading light, and the air was calm for the first time in weeks. They stood side by side, taking in the beauty around them, feeling the peace that had been so long denied by storms and cold. Brr. Armand reached for Zara's hand, intertwining their fingers. "We made it through everything," he said quietly.
"And I think this is just the beginning for us," Zara smiled, leaning slightly into him. "Yes," she said.
The storms may come again, but we'll face them together. And now we know that we can. The bond they had discovered in the shelter, forged through hardship and trust, had become a foundation for something much larger: hope, love, and a life shared in mutual respect. The sacred law, whether literal or symbolic, had guided them to this moment, a connection neither of them could ignore.
They had survived the cold together, faced danger and fear, and in the process discovered warmth far deeper than any fire could provide.
As night fell, they returned to the shelter, wrapping themselves in blankets and sitting close to the fire. The snow outside glimmered under the moonlight, serene and beautiful. Inside, they felt safe, warm, and deeply connected. Armand looked at Zara, his heart full, and she looked back at him, understanding completely without words. In the end, survival had been only the first step. The true gift of the storm was the bond they had discovered, the love and trust that had grown in the harshest conditions imaginable. And as they sat together, hearts beating in quiet harmony, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, strengthened by everything they had endured and everything they had found in each other.